there were more investigations and prosecutions of high-profile Democrats than Republicans by the Biden DOJ. So let me ask you this. How many high-profile Republicans do you see this DOJ targeting? And maybe I should clarify that and say, how many high-profile Republicans who still support Donald Trump do you see them targeting? At this point, if anyone had lingering questions about the disgusting weaponization of this DOJ and Intel leadership, they have been answered, in part with the raid on John Bolton's home. You had intelligence, you had the DOJ working together to make some case against Bolton, likely based on a book he wrote in 2020, which was critical of Trump. Now, look, maybe it's based on something else, and heck, they did get 2 judges to sign off on search warrants. So there may be some violation of the law. But I'm pretty confident that whatever they may have will pale in comparison to the documents case against Donald Trump himself, where he and his team lied about having over 100 classified documents, a case where Trump has said there was no crime, that he behaved perfectly, it was a sham. Think about that. He's the one who set that standard for this kind of case if it's a classified documents case. Oh, and by the way, for those who fall for it's different because he was president, so he could declassify the documents, that's a ruse. There is no credible evidence he actually did that, but more importantly, the subpoena for the documents requested any documents with classified markings on them. So whether or not they were technically classified at that moment isn't even the point. As for the Bolton raid, whether Trump himself ordered it or the wildly unqualified FBI director Kash Patel pursued it, knowing that his boss would love it, is irrelevant. Think about the fact that yesterday, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie said something on TV that Trump didn't like. Trump immediately went to Truth Social and threatened to reopen a more than decade-old case against Christie. Think about that. You're going to tell me that's comparable to the Biden administration? So whether the DOJ is acting on direction or just responding and sucking up doesn't matter. It's scary. The Wall Street Journal editorial board was right, calling this even worse than they imagined. Fox's Andy McCarthy calling it a very sad development. But despite a handful of intellectually honest conservatives calling this out, most elected officials and MAGA media are supporting the Bolton raid. They're even celebrating it. But it's not happening in a vacuum. This comes on the heels of the Trump administration firing dozens of highly qualified prosecutors, and by the way, support staff as well. Their sin? Having been assigned to work on January 6th cases, or they were well-regarded prosecutors whose last name happens to be Comey. And by the way, those who claim Maureen Comey's dad, James Comey, was always out to get Trump and wanted to make sure he didn't win in 2016, they always conveniently ignore that in the lead up to the 2016 election, Comey and the FBI he led did not leak, that there was an ongoing Russia investigation into Trump. And that could have tanked Trump's campaign. They didn't do it. They reopened the investigation into Hillary Clinton 11 days before the election, but the Trump-Russia investigation was kept under wraps. None of the MAGA folks have ever been able to offer a remotely cogent explanation for that and reconcile it with this claim of, Comey was out to try to hurt Trump. The politicization has been rampant. Watchdogs fired in numerous departments to ensure there's little to no oversight. Investigations have been launched of people Trump feels have wronged him, like Chris Krebs, the former head of cybersecurity, who had the gall to to say that the 2020 election was fair. The White House released a statement about him, calling him a significant bad faith actor who weaponized and abused his government authority. What was the weaponization, you ask? Okay. Quote, that he falsely and baselessly denied that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen, including by inappropriately and categorically dismissing widespread election malfeasance and serious vulnerabilities with voting machines. That's why the guy is being investigated. This is truly insane stuff. And yet, when confronted about how absurdly political this all is, the response is the same. The Biden and Obama DOJs are the ones that started the politicization. So it is critical to address that claim, which I will. But first, here is J.D. Vance basically making that point this weekend.
Well, so we're in the very early stages of an ongoing investigation into John Bolton. I will say we're going to let that investigation proceed. What I can tell you is that unlike the Biden DOJ and the Biden FBI, our law enforcement agencies are going to be driven by law and not by politics. And so if we think that Ambassador Bolton has committed a crime, of course, eventually prosecutions will come. But as you know, Kristen, this is all part of gathering evidence, trying to understand something that we're worried about. And of course, I'll let the FBI comment on the next stage of the investigation.
I'll explain to you in a moment why that is total BS. But it's gone further than that, with the criminal referral from the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, over President Obama and many in his administration supposedly engaging in a, quote, seditious conspiracy with the Trump-Russia investigation. Now, I have previously explained on this show how and why that claim is total BS, that Gabbard has intentionally conflated one issue, whether voting machines were compromised by the Russians in the 2016 election, a claim that no top Obama officials ever claimed or determined was true, with the verifiable claim that the Russians tried to impact the 2016 election in favor of Donald Trump. And she knows, now, knowing that the Obama team only concluded the latter, meaning the effort to impact the election. She keeps falsely claiming that they somehow changed their position based on pressure from top officials. Except if you read all of the documents that she released, the Obama administration and the intel community's view, while subject to some back and forth, which is inevitable when it comes to intelligence, has been and still is stunningly consistent as far as intel goes. Yes, Russia tried to meddle. They did so in favor of Donald Trump. Heck, they hacked the DNC and top Clinton officials and then released it under a fake name. They put out ads against her. This isn't hard. It's not controversial. And yes, it's true, before that in the primary, they favored Bernie Sanders against Hillary Clinton. But it's 100% true the Russians tried to help Trump in the general election. Just read the Marco Rubio-led bipartisan Senate committee report, in addition to all the other DOJ investigations and the detailed Mueller indictments. Not one concluded that the Russia investigation was driven by politics. Now, one of the most persuasive voices speaking out against this Biden DOJ weaponization nonsense was former FBI Director Chris Wray, appointed by President Trump in his first term. At a Senate hearing in 2023, he pointed out that as a, quote, lifelong Republican, the idea that he was leading a politicized FBI made no sense. And in another hearing in 2022, he responded to one of the talking points that the FBI had supposedly been targeting pro-life protesters. He pointed out that more of their investigations were actually of the other side. Look, I've chronicled this before. There were more investigations and prosecutions of high-profile Democrats than Republicans by the Biden DOJ. So let me ask you this. How many high-profile Republicans do you see this DOJ targeting? And maybe I should clarify that and say, how many high-profile Republicans who still support Donald Trump do you see them targeting? Look, those trying to sucker you into believing that weaponization was rampant under Biden also cite the January 6th cases. They claim that many or most of the defendants got the book thrown at them compared to other cases, particularly compared to the 2020 protesters in the wake of the death of George Floyd. Except that ignores key facts, like that there were tens of thousands of people protesting on January 6th, and yet only 1,600 of them got criminally charged. Only those who went inside the Capitol building or attacked officers. There were thousands more who went on to the restricted perimeter on the Capitol when the fencing and barricades around it were breached, and who were not prosecuted, even though they technically violated the law. No one talks about that. As for the summer of 2020 rioters, it was Trump's AG, Bill Barr, who led the federal prosecutions. Thousands were arrested, and as I've discussed before, an Associated Press comparison of charges against January 6th protesters and BLM rioters published in June of 2021, you can go find it, found that in more than 300 federal cases stemming from the protests sparked by George Floyd's death, dozens of people charged were convicted of serious crimes and sent to prison. More than 70 defendants got an average of about 27 months behind bars. 10 received prison terms of 5 years or more. And that says nothing about any state charges that were filed. So while I do think that some of the least culpable January 6th folks may have been overcharged, the argument that the January 6th criminals were targeted while the summer rioters were not doesn't fly, and certainly doesn't justify the ridiculous political pardons and clemency for all the January 6th criminals. But here's the thing. Even the less splashy claims of politicization under AG Merrick Garland don't hold up under scrutiny. Like the claim that the Biden DOJ supposedly targeted parents protesting at school boards. This is something you hear all over right-wing media. The main talking point there was a letter from the National School Boards Association that was issued in 2021, warning of threats to school board members and describing it as akin to, quote, domestic terrorism. The organization, the NSBA, later apologized for the language, but here's the most important point. The Justice Department never used that language or endorsed it. In fact, AG Garland said he disagreed with it. And an investigation determined there was no direct or indirect evidence suggesting the administration requested the letter or specified, edited, reviewed the contents of it before it was sent. No parent was prosecuted by the DOJ as a domestic terrorist, not one. The biggest gripe is the prosecution of Donald Trump, right? This, they say, shows how the DOJ went after their political opponent. Now, this, of course, completely ignores the reality that AG Merrick Garland initially refused to prosecute Trump for January 6th. He didn't want to do it, despite lots of complaining and pressure from the left. If he had done it in 2021, that case would have been resolved well before the election. What ultimately forced Garland's hand wasn't the left. It was the Trump lies about the classified documents at his home. Bottom line, Trump never would have been prosecuted by the DOJ if he and his team didn't lie about the sensitive documents he had at Mar-a-Lago. Unlike Joe Biden and Mike Pence, who gave full access to search and recover any documents, the Trump team had particularly sensitive ones which they lied to the FBI about. They were asked for all documents with classified marking. So whatever level of classification the documents had at the time, the Trump team promised there were no other documents marked classified. That was a lie. It was only then, mid-2022, that Garland appointed an outside prosecutor to investigate and also appointed a Republican one to investigate Biden. Can you imagine if Pam Bondi had appointed a Democratic AG, or a Democratic special counsel to investigate Trump? No way he would let it happen. Special counsel Jack Smith made the decision to prosecute for January 6th, not Garland. And it's not comparable to anything Biden or Mike Pence did. Look, I have criticized the state cases against Trump. You can believe that local prosecutors like Alvin Bragg, Letitia James, and Fani Willis were politicized, as I do. Do I think Trump engaged in wrongdoing? Of course he did, particularly with the documents case. But I can also tell you with some degree of confidence that the Alvin Bragg and Letitia James cases in particular would not have been brought if he wasn't Donald Trump. I don't think they were trying to hurt his election campaign. Both actually helped him politically. But I do think both were trying to help themselves politically.